Brian Stevens here with Mortgage Shots of the National Real Estate Post. I have Dave Stevens, whose resume speaks for itself. I think everybody knows Dave. If you'd like to contact Dave, his information is anywhere around this video. Dave, how are we doing today?
We're good, Brian. Good to be with you again, as always.
Yeah. Long time no talk. A lot's happened since we spoke last.
Yes, just a bit.
Yeah, the big one, and it's kind of, I think we've kind of seen this one on the horizon for quite some time, is everything that's taken place with NAR or multiple listing systems and some of the large brokers out there. My thinking is lawyers sue. This is just the tip of the iceberg, and I can't see a good ending for NAR or the large brokers. I think they're going to find themselves in lawsuits for the foreseeable future. Is that an accurate statement? And what do you think is going to happen?
They're definitely in lawsuits. As we all know, there's been some piggyback lawsuits. I mean, full disclosure, Brian, I'm an expert witness in these cases. I was in Missouri for the big case that they lost on, testifying on how it would impact the mortgage banking industry. But I testified that Thursday, they did closing arguments on Friday, and the jury came back on Tuesday morning. They only deliberated for 2.5 hours in total. They looked at literally no review of the testimony or the evidence presented. It's almost like they were uninterested. And that leads a lot of the lawyers involved to believe that they could be successful on appeal. The difference between a problem with a jury trial, when it gets to technical, sort of complicated buyer broker agreements and how the real estate industry works and all of the accusations that were coming out, is many of them were not even homeowners on that jury. And there's a general feeling amongst the legal firms involved that when you put this in front of an appellate court, which is where it's going next, that an appeals court judge will rule on the evidence and nothing more, and the arguments, and they won't be subject to being bored or just not wanting to pay attention or whatever. The extraordinarily short duration after weeks of trial, again, 2.5 hours, with literally no request to review any of the evidence provided before they made their decision, is an indicator to some that this jury may not be the best predictor about what happens over the long term. But nevertheless, we already know there's a suit in Illinois. I'm right now currently, I've been deposed in that, and I'm supposed to be an expert witness in that, which that case will be heard next fall. But there's other cases popping up around the country. So yes, it's messy. My big concern, Brian, honestly, and for everybody listening, is too many real estate professionals view themselves as experts. There's a lot more realtors than there are loan officers, and opinions right now abound over this case. And a lot of realtors are trainers, and they're in the business, and they have reputations. And so for whatever reason, it's believed that when they come up with an opinion on this case, that somehow they have facts that other people don't have. The truth is, most of them aren't lawyers. Most of them were not in Missouri with me and the others fighting the case. And I will tell you that these real estate firms have some of the most powerful legal firms representing them in the country. So I would just say, my only suggestion is keep your powder dry. Don't over lean into all the opinions out there. Opinions are like, I'm not going to say what they are, but everyone has one. And in the end of the day, I think this thing's going to take a while to play out. This appeal alone could take as long as 2 years. So I would just suggest that people just turn off the noise, because it's freaking realtors out in particular, as you know.
Yeah.
And I've done a lot of events for large mortgage lenders who are inviting the realtor partners. And we've had, 1,000+ realtors on these calls. They can't get enough of just the calm and sense that says, guys, just don't stop reading the opinions in some of the trade rags. They're the biggest guesses there are, and built on the least amount of fact. And so from that standpoint, I would just say we got a long fight here. But nevertheless, to your point, Brian, yeah, there are a lot of suits popping up, a lot of mirror actions to the ones that were filed, no question about it. So it's going to be expensive, and it's going to be messy for a while.
Okay, but you're the expert witness, so you can have an opinion here. Now, I think what I hear you saying is that you disagree with the verdict on here. And I mean, I'm looking at this and I'm like, this kind of seems to me like it's more an indictment of the industry as a whole than it is being factually accurate, or they should have been found guilty of what they've been accused of here. Do you disagree with the verdict on this?
I got to be careful what I say. So just to be clear, the unfortunate reality is I'm restricted a little bit about how open I can speak on this case or the ones coming forward. But I would tell you this, that to think that, you know, 1 million individual real estates in this country are experts at colluding with each other is pretty difficult for me to swallow.
Right.
The big real estate firms recruit from each other constantly. There's no obligation that anybody pay 6% to sell their home or 5% or whatever the number is. There are discount brokerages that have tried, haven't always made it, but they have tried. My core fundamental point starts from this basis, which is if you're a first-time home buyer, which is right now almost half of the buying population, going out to buy a home, the most expensive decision you're ever going to make. How are you going to do this if you don't have professional representation, right? Are you going to start having to call every individual listing agent to find out if you can come preview their home for sale?
Right.
Because don't forget, you have a full-time job, you have family to take care of and all this. Got a lot of time you now have to invest if you're not going to have someone doing the previews for you, understanding your needs and desires in the home you want to buy, all of those variables. Knowing what's overpriced based on a website portal and oversold that may be sitting on a steep lot or back into a railroad track. I mean, these are the things that the internet portals don't show you. And so there's value in that. And then when it comes to time to making the offer, how do you know what offer to put in? Do you go at full price, list price? You have to go above list price in a seller's market. Do you come in below list price if the market's soft? What about conditions? What about the home inspection if it shows up various things? Can't even put in requests that the seller make those payments. And keep in mind, if this settlement in Missouri, this case in Missouri becomes the law of the land, let's say years down the road, and we begin to look more like the United Kingdom or Australia, you're going to have only one person represented professionally in a transaction, and that's going to be the seller. And so in the end of the day, you'll have that listing agent representing the property and the minnow being thrown into the shark tank without anybody by his or her side to help them through the process. I think there's a real risk of unfair consumer treatment by not having a financed expert representing you when you buy a home. Not everybody needs one necessarily, but I personally think that's a core argument here. And we'll just see how this plays out when we go through the appellate court.
Okay, so let me answer your question here, or what your statement that you just said. You said, well, are you really going to go in there and put an offer on a house and not have representation? Do you go above or do you go below? Can you really do this without a professional? And here's what I would say, that there are forces at play that are heavily funded by Wall Street private equity firms who are positioning themselves as alternatives to real estate agents, who all these companies have market cap rates that loop every real estate company in the country, who took a run at the real estate industry just a couple of short years ago, failed miserably at it, have now regrouped. And what it appears to me that the byproduct of this, if it works, is it creates a void, and in that vacuum will be filled an alternative to real estate agents, which are a lot of these fintech companies, which are heavily funded, and they're a more expensive alternative to real estate agents. It seems like it's working out perfectly for them. It almost looks as if this is by design. And we don't have to go too far with these fintech companies to see that
let me just suggest this.
Okay.
What you just said is part of that speculation, right? We don't know. We don't know if some fintech firm is going to come in and fill that void, as it were. They sure as heck don't do it in Australia and the United Kingdom, which were markets that some of the lawyers on the plaintiff side used as example markets of how the system can function. They don't have high-tech providers coming in filling that void. Look, I've been in this business 40 years. This is my 40th year. I started in 1983. I have a pretty good deep resume, right? Including running one of the largest real estate companies in the nation, Long and Foster, with 11,000 real estate agents at one point. My wife and I bought 14 or maybe 15 homes. I can't even keep count in our lives. I use a professional real estate agent every single time, and I'm in the business. Why? Because they know the story of the listing. They know what homes sold in the area. They can help me with comps. They understand what the seller will accept depending on market conditions, and whether it's a buyer's market or a seller's market. They help me walk through the home inspection and what's doable, what's not doable if we go ask for conditions to be repaired or fixed. All of that, and more importantly, the initial screening process of going through all the homes that are being pushed on the internet web portals, that all look like they're fantastic homes. I remember my wife and I were buying a home in Northwest DC many years ago. And when I worked in the Obama administration, but we were buying a home in Northwest Washington. And we started going out and looking them up on the internet and driving by. We'd drive by the home and go, whoa, that's rough. Even though it looked fantastic on the internet, we realized very quickly, I don't have the time. I had a full-time job. I don't have the ability to do the work that an expert can do for me. I am not sure how, I'm not going to name the company, but I'm not sure how a well-funded fintech is going to come in with some sort of virtual capability to be able to use artificial intelligence and help me identify that home, choose the offer, et cetera. Maybe it's there, maybe it's not, but I would really encourage everybody not to take the leap from where the system operates today to it's going to be like that, because we don't have it now. Unless someone can show me one that really works, I still remain pretty incredulous to the outcome that many people are thinking this is going to be. I'm just curious to see, will it mean that in some markets, we're going to see listings where the seller is not the seller agent, a listing agent is not providing buyer broker compensation? Yeah, we'll see that. We're already seeing some. And those markets are generally pure sellers markets. Homes are selling at or above list price, multiple offers, sold in a number of hours, typically, where you really don't need the value necessarily of a buyer broker.
Right.
And my only caution to everybody is be careful if you throw the baby out with the bathwater, because someday we're going to be back to a buyer's market.
Yep.
And that seller is going to need every possible potential buyer coming to that house to look at it. And the efficiencies that the current system offers is pretty good. We're complaining about 2 or 3%, whatever the buyer broker commission is. Even the law firm argued. The law firm representing the plaintiffs against realtor firms said that they expect that the buyer broker commission would drop from an average of 3% today to 1.6% in the absence of forced buyer brokerage. That ain't a lot of a drop to take away professional representation to those who need it the most. Wealthy folks who want a professional realtor, doing all the research for them, et cetera, they can stroke the check, no big deal. But every first-time home buyer right now is getting down payment assistance and desperately scraping together every penny they can to buy that home with their dreams. Now expected to come up with a couple of percent additional to get a professional representative. I don't like the outcome. So I still remain arguing for the plaintiffs. And guys, I'm no huge fan of big behemoth real estate companies. I don't care. I am a fan of the individual, independent contractor, professional real estate agent who knows that community and knows that market. And by the way, works for an average in the United States today of $49,000 a year. That's what the average income is for a real estate agent. If someone thinks that's like a easy pay job and a get rich quick scheme, the way this commission structure is set up, they don't understand what they're talking about. So all I would say right now is let's take a bit of a pause pill. Let's not pile on the real estate business before we know what we have to replace it with and see how this plays out.
Right. And by the way, just real quickly, these fintech firms are currently actively and have been for quite some time positioning and marketing themselves as alternatives. If it's going to happen or not, I don't know, but that's what they're saying. They're forward facing. And you're right. A real estate agent on average, our commissions fluctuate. They always go up and down. So I don't know how it's price fixing. And in hot markets, like you suggested, we've always had the discount brokers out there who've participated in the industry. So we've always seen kind of the ups and downs on this. So your belief then is that in most markets, that we think that there's still going to be a place for real estate agents if this verdict is upheld and if these lawsuits persist?
Well, I don't know how the long-term plays out, Brian, honestly. I've been involved in these cases now for well over 2 years. I've written expert witness statements that are 40 pages long each. I've analyzed the markets in the United Kingdom and Australia. I've had with the lawyers involved. I've set up calls with companies in both of those markets. The reason why is there's virtually no buyer representation in those markets. But I also believe that those markets favor the wealthy, and I believe that firmly. And so I don't know how this ultimately plays out. I think the question is, will the appeals process prevail in the Missouri case? That's going to be a real telltale sign for us, because I think all the other cases get more difficult with the ruling in the Missouri court until the Missouri court ruling is challenged. Because right now you have a precedent, right? The precedent is that ruling. Until that ruling gets challenged to the appellate court, and if by chance it's defeated or modified, then the whole game changes a little bit further. So we just have to see how it plays out. And guys, I am no lawyer. I've worked around way too many of them for the last couple of years on this case. But that's why I just think, will it all change? I don't know. I worry that the disruption effect would be harmful. I think we have the best system in the nation, in the world, for buying and selling, transacting in real estate, which is the United States system. I think our only biggest problem are corporate equity firms, private firms coming in and buying up a lot of the real estate supply, but that's being dealt with through another set of actions. But I would just say, in the end of the day, I believe our system works better than those in Europe and in Australia. And you can't compare it solely on things like home ownership rates, because we have a very unique social environment in the United States. We have a country built on slavery. And so we have a very deferred home ownership rate for African Americans in particular, and Hispanics, which the other countries don't have to deal with in terms of home ownership rates in total. But I think the reality is our system has worked pretty damn good. And for everybody to suddenly pile on and say, I don't want to pay that 2%, but please give me the 2-1 buy down and let me pay, $2,500 in title insurance for my home. I just think we're focusing on the wrong things. I think we need to look at the value proposition of what's the best system for potential home buyers.
So I have two questions real quickly. The first one is I saw that you said that this is going to be handled in the courts. It's not going to be handled through the Department of Justice. The DOJ had dropped this before. We know that it's been picked up again in investigation. Is that eventually going to be dropped, or could that be problematic for the bigger picture? And the other question, which is separate, that you just brought up that I think is interesting, what about the unintended consequences of underrepresentation for underserved communities across the country that this is that this could affect, that you're stating here? Has that been addressed as in this case?
The plaintiffs tried to address it. They tried to diminish the needs of underserved Americans. One of the representatives of the plaintiffs went so far as to try to reduce the number to something small enough, still in the millions, of Americans, to say that's less important. What happens? The reality, as I said earlier, is those that can afford to write the check for private representation,
right,
will do so. Just like they'll hire a private attorney to handle the transaction for them. And they'll, and all of the other things. Look, we go through a process, Brian, and I want you guys to think about buyers markets that we've been in the past, where the seller goes through very aggressive marketing campaigns to sell their home. And they cater open houses at their home to make sure tons of realtors are coming in to try some really great gourmet food in order to look at that home for sale, hoping that they'll bring their buyers to the home. To think that all of this cost and expense in the real estate transaction is wrapped up into this little commission of an individual who on average in America earns $45,000 a year and busts his or her hump to try to meet the needs of their potential home buyer, I just think we're missing the boat here. What's really bothered me is all this piling on effect. But to your point, no question. The worst impact will be to those that can least afford it. And that's going to be first-time home buyers, particularly those from underserved communities where they don't have money from mom and dad to help draw on to pay for a professional real estate agent to deal with the transaction with them. So
could we then, I guess what I was
back to the courts. DOJ, the DOJ is just another judge, right? The DOJ is just another court. So there are cases being filed in state courts and district courts. And then there's also the potential DOJ action. And all of these will go through legal arguments on the basis of the argument themselves. I actually lean into thinking that the DOJ will likely be the most rational because they're all lawyers and judges. It's not a jury trial. But we'll just have to see how all of these play out. There's just too many lawsuits going on. But will it play out in the courts? Yeah, 100%. There's no legislative move here. NAR can do nothing by lobbying Capitol Hill and trying to get a bunch of members of Congress to say, protect the realtors. That's not going to happen. This is currently 100% embedded in the legal structure of our country.
Okay, but here's my question. If it goes through the court systems and if this is upheld and the lawsuits continue, that seems a reasonable projection, and it does have unintended consequences on underserved communities that you can't roll back. could we then expect to see perhaps HUD or the DOJ coming in, or could they do anything to guarantee representation for minority groups and underserved communities? Or is it, if the courts come up with a solution to this and it undermines the buyer's agent, is it just kind of, oh, well, that's what we're going to be stuck with? And
well, I guess regulators could come in and say this is discriminatory by effect, which is what we'd be looking for. We'd be looking for, as you all know, in discrimination law, there are two terms used all the time. It's intent and effect. And while the plaintiffs of the case will say there's no intent here to be discriminatory, it could be ruled by regulators that the effect will be discriminatory, because only those that can afford to write a check to pay for a realtor are going to be able to have an expert represent them, and the rest are going to be left, up to their own good luck, fighting up against the professional expertise of a well-heeled seller and their listing agent. So I think that's certainly a possibility for consideration. This is such a big set of moves in place that I think all of this stands to pause. So the reason why I said I look for the appeals court in Missouri to rule is if they rule and modify the ruling, it's going to affect all the other cases, because that will then become the precedent, and the precedent will have then gone through an appellate court, which is higher than the court it was originally fought in. And so it will limit the class action opportunity for all of these guys piling on in all the other states. There's other options here. There could be a national settlement. You may all remember in the mortgage business, we had a national settlement that the DOJ drove for False Claims Act violations at HUD. And that suit and that settlement amongst the major banks ended up superseding all other actions in the courts. So that kind of thing could happen too. We just have to see how this plays out. And we're in the infancy stage, guys. This just happened, in my view, like 10 minutes ago, even though it was a couple months ago. It's so brand new, and we have all the fights taking place. And yeah, all the little class action firms are going to start piling on. I've been a defendant in other class action law cases. I'm not going to make judgment, but nevertheless,
make a judgment. Oh, what were you going to say?
No, I don't. I think that there are law firms that do class action cases as a profession. There are law firms that some have called ambulance chasers over the years, who make, get on TV and say, if you've been hurt in an accident, call me, we'll sue the hell out of them. I think the nature of class action legal cases is about money as much as it is justice. And we'll see.
No, to pivot here, how is this going to affect the mortgage space? Is there anything immediately that a mortgage company or loan officer is going to have to change what they're doing if this is upheld, or as this makes its way through the courts?
There's a lot of considerations being discussed. I won't name the names of folks who wrote expert testimony in this space from that side, but there's concerns. Like right now, if it gets to be a world where two homes side by side sell, one has the selling agent compensating the buyer broker, like we have been operating for the last number of decades. Okay. And the other doesn't. The other doesn't offer buyer broker compensation. Do you begin to look at the true value of a home differently over time? Will Freddie and Fannie now have to say, well, those two appraisals can't come out the same, because the one paying the buyer broker might cost more than the one not paying a buyer broker? We don't know if that'll happen, but that might be the case. In a seller's market, guys, by the way, don't assume it will. In a seller's market, the seller just may get more money. They won't use a buyer broker, but there's such a line at the door anyway for the limited inventory. They'll still get the same markup on their home without paying the buyer broker. But there's a big question around collateral value in a transaction, what that means. There's questions about seller compensation. So what if instead of the seller paying the buyer broker incentive through the contract process where the listing agent offers it to the buyer broker, what if instead they offer it as a seller concession? Well, that's not acceptable in the VA program. You can't pay any realtor fees in seller concession fees with a VA loan. The GSEs have seller concessions, but they're capped. And they're capped by LTV, by the way. If you do get a seller concession capped by LTV, does that eliminate your ability to use points also for like a 2-1 buy down or a 1-0 buy down, because you also want to get a lower rate? So you now have to make harder decisions, because you're either going to get representation or you're going to get a buy down on your mortgage, because then the percent of fees is capped. And so all of these are raising questions about if this goes through and the seller wants to offer some form of compensation to allow that buyer to have representation because they put it in as part of their offer, or in advance they negotiate that, then it limits how funds can be used for other parts of the transaction. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of potential impacts from a how you evaluate collateral risk all the way through what you can do for mortgage financing down the road. And we are all thinking about it. Everybody's been thinking about it, and no one's reached a decision at this point.
So we're in round one. This is going to go on for a long time. This is going to be long and protracted. And right now, stay calm and stay the course. That's fair?
That's exactly right.
Where are we at right now with interest rates? We're seeing rates dropping a little bit right now. The big concern before is early payoffs and rates are all over the board. Now we're starting to see rates come down a little bit. What's the next 6 months hold right now? Is the mortgage industry okay with the drop in interest rates right now, or is this creating its own sense of havoc on the secondary market?
No, it's not creating a sense of havoc on the secondary market. I think it's bringing a little bit of normalcy. The spreads have contracted, which is a good thing, more to normalized levels. The problem is right now that if you look at economic forecasts, we have the widest divergence that I've ever seen. So the Urban Institute, which is a think tank in Washington, they publish a chart book every month. And on one of the pages, it gives 3 forecasts for mortgage rates and mortgage volumes: Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, MBA. I have never seen such a wide spread between Duncan at Fannie Mae and Frat and Tony at MBA. They have 100 basis point wide forecast going forward, from 6.1 to 7.1 roughly, and Freddie on the low end. Why? Well, there's those, if this phrase rings a bell to you, higher for longer. So we're hearing a lot of economists saying we're going to be higher for longer on interest rates. We're hearing others say that the Fed is basically done and we're going to bring spreads back to normalized levels and rates are going to drop. But one of the challenges in the higher for longer debate is, will the Treasury have to begin auctioning off more Treasury supply because of the increasing national debt? That's an unknown. We're not quite certain right now. If you do, and we don't have increased demand for Treasuries, a flight to quality, as it were, that could be problematic. And we have, there's questions about what's China and Russia and a couple of countries in Africa doing to try to disrupt the value of the Treasury markets. I'm not going to walk you down that rabbit hole.
Okay.
But in the end of the day, we need that value of the U.S. Treasury on the global market to continue to be very attractive in the auctions in order to not end up widening out interest rates and having them go up. So the higher for longer group says, the supply of currency, of treasuries and mortgages is still going to remain high, and therefore rates are going to remain higher. The other side of this says, now the Fed's done. They're not going to be tightening anymore. And as a result, they aren't going to be forcing the yield curve higher, which is what they've been doing for the last 22 months. And so in that regard, we're going to see the whole yield curve shift downward. The one thing both sides agree with is we're going to have a more steepened yield curve. The question is, will the steepness come from the long side rising or the short side dropping? And if you believe the short side is going to drop, then the whole curve drops down. If you believe the long side is going to rise, then the whole curve goes up. And so that's what people are seeing right now. The good news for everybody is we've had some, rates are now in the low 7s, and it's made people feel pretty good. And I've got a lot of lenders who are on the edge telling me, I think I can get out of this, and survive. And that's all positive. Is it refinanceable? No, it's not refinanceable. There's no coupon on the money. But I will tell you, when rates go into 7, people who need cash, they may do a cash out. They may decide, it's low enough, I need money out. And that's why you see cash out refinances have increased the last couple of months. Even as a percent of total market, it's clearly the majority of all refis being done. So is the home equity market and other parts of the market. So I continue to remain with where I've been kind of advising you and others as we do these conversations for the last few months. I think this winter is going to be very volatile still. I think we have a lot of volatility risk.
Okay.
As we speak today, you and I, we got unemployment news, and the numbers were, the job gains were lower than what most economists predicted. Most economists predicted numbers in the mid or low 200s. We ended up in the mid 100s. And so didn't change the unemployment rate, actually improved it a bit. That doesn't matter. So you got softness news, and you got concerns about supply and demand of treasuries and mortgage backs. You got a question about the global market and global demand, and that's enough to make your head spin. So I would say my trend is rates down. I'm a rate down guy.
Okay.
I agree with where Frat and Tony's headed. I think we're down into the high 6s next year by mid-year easy, and probably heading lower after that. but it could take some global disruption to change that the other way. So it's, look, we're fighting 2 wars now. I mean, this is crazy, right? Yeah. We're an environment. One of the things that economists, I was on with a group of economists yesterday in a room, and some top economists, I can't say their names, but they're really well known. And they go to Jackson Hole with the Fed chairman and all of this. Nice. And one of them said, I don't know why everybody's talking about gas, oil. There's been a lot of discussion in the markets about oil prices. Who cares? Oil's got nothing to do with it right now. I mean, we're seeing the whole entire infrastructure globally of equity flows is pretty disrupted, with, again, a war between Israel and Palestine and Hamas, and whether that spreads and becomes a contagion. But anyway, yeah, it's all part of that story.
I got one last question for you, and I think you made mention of this, and I just thought a moment ago, some of these private equity firms who are going out and just buying huge swaths of houses across the country. I think there's a piece of legislation that was just introduced that is going to limit the number of properties. What does that look like, and does it have legs? And do you think it's a good idea?
I think it's a high-risk approach to limit private capital from being able to transact in any market. I just think that's a problem. Home prices will bear what the market bears. And, we do have a challenge of supply. And I know a lot of people on the buy side are just worried about all the inventory being taken up in certain markets around the country. And it's definitely a challenge. I would say all of this is for nothing. The legislation will never become a bipartisan piece of legislation to pass both sides of Congress and get a president's signature on it. So it's a good debate, not going to go anywhere. Even if it passes by, this much in the Senate, it would never make it through the House. So
good fodder for an election cycle, maybe?
Yes. Yeah. Our crazy election ahead. No question.
Oh, God. Pop some corn. This is going to be crazy. Dave, hey, listen, thanks so much for everything. Just appreciate you jumping back on here and sharing this with us. I know you've been speaking with mortgage companies around the country and sharing your insight. And so I hope a lot of folks get a lot out of what we shared today. And I look forward to talking to you again here real soon.
Great, Brian. Good to be with you, and anytime.
All right. Thanks, bud. Appreciate it.
Yeah.